All right, great. So yeah, hi, my name is Kara Snow, and I'm going to talk to you today about a new research project on pileated woodpeckers that we're starting up in the Avian Ecology Lab, which is part of the Natural Resources Research Institute out of Duluth. And I'm also going to talk about how you can help with this project. So just a little bit of an overview of why we chose to develop a research project on pileated. Well, first, they are awesome, and everybody in the lab just kind of wanted an excuse to get out in the woods and follow these baddies around the forest. But actually, the Avian Ecology Lab has been monitoring forest bird populations in the state's national forest. And one trend that has concerned us is a decline in the cavity nesters guild. So pileated woodpeckers are considered a keystone species in Minnesota forests in that they are primary cavity creators, and which means that other species rely on the cavities that pileates make for their own nesting or shelter. So this project isn't just about woodpeckers, really. It's more about like the whole crew of species that move in after pileates move out, which includes some of Minnesota's species of concern, like pine martens, boreal owls, long-eared owls. So they're a really important species. This is a study from Canada in the 90s. It just has a list of species that have been found in old pileated cavities. So you can see there's like a huge range of animals that will use their cavities, all the way from, as I mentioned earlier, large mammals like martens, but other bird species, bats, and even some insects will use old pileated cavities. So these are species that require a cavity at some time during their life cycle, but they're unable to make their own, so they really are reliant on the cavities made by woodpeckers or just like natural decay. Also, as you can see, I am really bad at Tetris. But despite their importance as a keystone species, there haven't really been like a lot of studies on pileated woodpeckers in Minnesota. Michael North from the DNR, who I know has spoken at a few MOU paper session meetings, has done some research on the characteristics of their nest trees. But in regards to their impact on ecosystem function and their response to forest management practices and the lifespan and secondary use of woodpecker cavities, we don't really have that data in the state. So our goal is to assess how forest management in the state is impacting their habitat use, movement, and nesting. I'm just going to touch kind of briefly on the details and development of this project. We're going to be conducting this research in two general areas in the state, so the Chippewa National Forest and the Superior National Forest. And in each of these regions, we have three 8 by 8 kilometer plots representing 3 degrees of forest management intensity. So for the low intensity, we're kind of looking at how national forests are managed. So generally, like not cutting timber, not cutting too much old growth forest. And then for like our medium intensity, where it's kind of meant to represent how states typically manage their forests. So there's some cutting, but it's not super intensive. And then high management sites. So really heavily harvested and on like really short rotations. So heavily harvested and not many years between those harvests. And we also have been looking at other factors when we've chose our sites, like what kind of forest cover, the ownership, and also accessibility. So we've been using we used like a combination of GIS layers to identify those sites, and then over the winter we spent a couple months visiting and ground proofing those sites just to see if they were going to be good for our pileated project. You can see there's a picture of us snowmobiling through one of our sites. That's me in the back. That was one of those days that was like -8 and but made it through with fingers and toes. So a big effort in this project is going to be finding nesting cavities of pileated woodpeckers, and then also documenting adult habitat use and home range. So to do this, we're going to be tagging adult birds, and the with those tagged birds, that's going to help us locate their nesting cavities, but then we can also document their habitat use by coming back to those areas that they have been pinpointed at, and then also documenting their home range and seeing how that differs between those different study treatments. We're going to be surveying for pileated woodpeckers across those sites, looking at density, and also during their surveys, again, looking for nesting cavities. And we really want to get as many pileated nesting sites as possible around the state to increase our knowledge base. So we're collaborating with like the Minnesota DNR and the Forest Service, bless them. And we are also seeking input from the community. And hang tight, because that's where all of you will come in, hopefully later, but I'll get to that later in the presentation. And these pictures are, we have some GPS tags. Those are like these little backpacks that we're going to be putting on adult pileatids. And then the decoys are really helpful for bringing them in when we're trying to misnet them, when they're in their kind of like really territorial stage during the breeding season. Major update. We have actually caught our first research subject. So Dr. Bracy has been out in the last few weeks trying to capture adult pileatids to put those GPS backpacks on. And on March 17th, with a little luck of the iris, she actually caught this beautiful female. This figure on the right is the first data points that we have gotten from her tag. Just pretty exciting. It kind of looks like the weather is going to be like a bit dicey next week. So I'm not sure if we'll be able to get out there and do some trapping efforts again, but hopefully like a couple mornings we'll be able to put some nets up and maybe grab some more. And after we locate nesting cavities, we'll be conducting habitat surveys around the nest area and also characterizing their nesting cavities. So this larger picture is the lab getting trained in on habitat surveying methods that the Minnesota DNR uses for their wood duck cavity surveys, which is, I suppose in part also kind of a pileated cavity survey, since wood ducks do often nest in old pileated cavities. And we'll also be documenting what secondary cavity dwellers move in after pileated youngsters have fledged the nest. And we'll be doing that by putting cameras up on old nests. And we'll also be putting up automatic recording or units in the study sites, ARUs, to record what other secondary cavity dwellers are in these study sites. So like other bird species, like other woodpecker or other birds that nest in cavities are in the area. And then finally, with this data, we're going to be developing some management guidelines that will consider woodpecker habitat and cavity availability across the state. And this is where you come in, and where you possibly can help out with this project as fellow birders and naturalists and amateur ornithologists. So we're asking for your help in locating pileated woodpecker nests during this breeding season. So the more nests that we can document, the better that we can characterize their breeding habitat and their resource needs and inform management options. So basically, save the world for woodpeckers and for wildlife. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about their breeding habitat and give some tips for finding nests. So they really like these hardwood or mixed forests with really large and mature trees. Their favorite tree species to nest in is like aspen species. but they'll also just nest in like snags, and sometimes they'll be found in some conifers. But the thing is that they really need large trees. So at least like a 33 centimeter diameter tree is needed for their nesting. Um, it's typically like around 40 is kind of like the average. That's what Mike North from the DNR found in one of his studies. So we're looking for forests with large mature trees, and lots of aspen is also really good for their breeding. There's kind of like two really good windows in their breeding seasons for finding nests. The first is the period when they're setting up their territories and excavating their nests. So this period is starting actually right now. We had our first couple of field days this week. Me and my coworker, Reed Siebers, we went out to our Chippewa sites and spent a few days scoping those out and kind of just documenting territories of pileatids. But they are starting to excavate in some areas. So things to look for: males and females paired together. That's probably a pretty good sign that there's some nesty behavior going on. Signs of excavation, so seeing like fresh wood chips at the base of the tree, or the beginnings of a cavity, or just even if you see a bird excavating, it's probably a good sign it will be nesting there. And also listening for drumming. Okay, hopefully my sound here works. We tested it out yesterday. Okay, wait, that's the call one. Did that work? Somebody give me a yes, no?
Yeah, we got it.
Oh, right on. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, okay, so this is their calling. Great. And then the drumming. All right, so yeah, if you're out birding and you hear those things, it's probably a pretty good sign that you are in or nearby a pileated territory. So good sign that there could be some nesty behavior going on there. Also just listening for them excavating the nest. So just like similar to drumming, but slower and just kind of like chipping away at making that nest. And there we go. And the second best chance on encountering a nest is probably going to be like the nestling stage. It's probably going to be a little bit more difficult during like the incubation stage because there's a lot quieter and the birds are just in the cavity incubating. But the nestling stage is kind of that second great window for finding nests. And that's going to be occurring kind of like throughout May and into late June. And during this stage, looking for adults carrying food, going in and out of a cavity, nestlings poking their adorable faces out of a cavity. Also listening for nestling begging calls. And, I'm sure a lot of us have encountered this, but woodpecker nestlings are just incessant. I don't know how that evolved to be beneficial because it seems like, gosh, everything in the woods hears them, but they're just kind of like incessant little beggings, which I will play here now. Yeah. So yeah, if you're out birding in some woods and you hear this, you're probably pretty close to a pileated nest. Okay, they can be quiet now. Yeah, so if you hear that, probably pretty close to a pileated nest. I know I've personally have found not pileated, but downy and hairy woodpecker nests just from hearing that, like incessant nestling begging. I must drive them nuts, I swear. Okay, so those are kind of good tips for finding their nests. And then, you know, if you do find an active pileated woodpecker nest, the first step, of course, will be to celebrate. And then contact the Avian Ecology Lab. This is just a QR code. Maybe you can scan it now if you want to just pull it up and see what that looks like. We have a Google Doc that you can record nesting locations in and send it to us. And I'll also be sending this out through like the MOU listserv. Next week, I'm planning on like contacting different Facebook groups to get this out there, and like giving this out to different local Audubon chapters just to kind of get the word out. And if anybody actually has like their own like birding group or something like that they wanted to kind of distribute this to, you can get in contact with me and we can work that out. You do need to have like a Google account for the Google Doc, but I'll also show my email later and you can just email me and we can figure it out too. But then some important things that you would want to record if you do find a pileated nest would be the location. If you could get a GPS mark, that would be great, but also, you know, you can drop a pin on the map app on your phone, or if it's in an area that you know really well, you can just take detailed notes on that location, recording the date, taking photos of the nest. We're really looking for active nests and like confirmed ones. So, you know, not just like a cavity that you find. Like we really want to make sure that they're active nests. And then also taking like detailed notes on the nesting location. Like the tree species that it's found in, the height of the cavity from the ground, the direction it's facing, any other useful notes to help a member of the lab find the nest later. And then any other interesting notes that you'd like to take, behavior, the stage of the nest, etc. And you know, your help and the data that we gain from the study will help strengthen an understanding of the role that forestry and land managers play in managing Minnesota public lands and how that contributes to the creation of habitat for the birds that we love and other species that rely on them. And so yeah, if you wanted to learn more about the Avian Ecology Lab and all of like the neat research projects that we do, I have another QR code. I hope that they work. I'm not really a computer person, and it took me like a few times to try to figure this out. But I also included our email and just like the website for our lab. But yeah, we do a lot of really important and interesting research on birds throughout the state. So give us a check out and see different projects that we work on. And yeah, and with that, I'll answer any other questions, and I have my email down here if you wanted to learn more about the Pileated Woodpecker project, or if you want if you want me to send you that link to the Google form. Yeah, that's it. 20 minutes. And yeah, I'll take any questions on Pileateds or the projects.
Thanks, Kara. It looks like we have a few questions in the chat. So Alyssa asks if Pileated's nest in telephone poles in Minnesota. She's aware that they do that in Quebec.
Let me see if I can turn I'm gonna do that and do this. Yeah, in Michael North's research on nesting, he did out of his, I can't remember what his data set was. I think it was something like 50 nests. One of them was in a telephone pole, so they do that too. So if you wanted to go down some, you know, check out some telephone poles, probably not going to be the, not going to find the most nests there, but they do, yes.
Thank you. And then someone was asking if you are also looking for nests in Wisconsin or just Minnesota.
We're just looking at Minnesota for this study. I mean, definitely if you find them, you can fill out a doc, but uh for this study, we're just looking at it throughout the state. Also, I forgot to note, but if you find a nest and it's confirmed later in the fall, members of the avian ecology lab might come out to that nest and do those habitat surveys and cavity characterizing surveys at the nest. So it also has to be you know, close enough that we can get there to do that.
Do you, Ezra was asking, do you know how much the old growth aspen stands have declined in Minnesota in the past 30 years?
I don't have the statistics on that, but just in general, old growth forests have been in decline in the last 30 years. Lots of cutting. And the thing is also like there's kind of like a mismatch in what foresters would consider old for aspen and what and like from like a wildlife standpoint on what uh old growth would be and the requirements for that. Like for aspens to get that big, they need, 50, 70 years to get to be ideal size for pileatids. And I think like the typical rotation for aspen is around like 30 or something. So just not really a lot of time for them to get that big if they're being used for timber.
And we have some folks that were asking about location on trees. So how big are the holes and about how far up off the ground are they?
Yeah, they're typically around like 9 meters from the ground. So and the hole in diameter, it's going to be about, let me try to think of something that you can liken it to. Oh, I don't know, cell phone length or a little bit bigger. I have my cell phone right in front of me, so. And they're typically more circular or a little bit oblong as opposed to like their foraging cavities, which are that like really typical like kind of square or like rectangle shape. So that's another thing to help you kind of like suss out between if it's like a foraging cavity or if it's for a nesting cavity.
Okay, that's really helpful. And then I think one last question here from Justin. Do pileatids respond to emerald ash borers moving into an area?
Um, I like, do they respond by feeding on emerald ash borers? That is interesting. And actually part of a different project that we have is looking for invasives and invasive species, including emerald ash borer, in bird feces. So we have a project on identifying invasive species through eDNA. So we're actually collecting feces of different birds that we capture and going to different like map stations and collecting their feces to see if we can detect emerald ash borer in their feces. So we are going to be also collecting their poop if they poop while we are catching them and seeing if we can detect emerald ash borer in it. So that will be an interesting thing to find out.